All right. Welcome everyone to the conversation. I'm so glad to have you here. We're gonna talk, we're gonna chat, we're gonna connect, we're gonna hopefully hear from some of you in the discussion today. And I'm really, really excited about that. So as I'm bringing on our panelists to welcome them to the conversation, and you're listening in out there, wherever you might be, go ahead and chime in. Let us know where you're listening from, where you're connecting in from. It's fun to see where everybody is and where these messages are reaching. So I'd love to hear from you as you're getting settled in for the conversation. So we'll start bringing our panelists together. Our amazing panelists. How about that? So we have Shaina Sweeney, Jonathan Cork, and Danielle Bowie here to talk with us about childcare, about parenting, about work, and how all those things right now seem to be coming to a head. We're going to talk about how to deal with that, how they are both in their own companies kind of helping to solve those problems. So I'm so glad to have each of you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead, do a quick round robin introductions for everybody. And again, a reminder for everybody who's listening in, go ahead and chime in, let us know where you're checking in from. Danielle, why don't you go first? Tell us a little bit about your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben. Really excited to be here. Again, I'm Danielle Bowie. I work at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. The Broad is a nonprofit genomics research institute focused on curing disease using genetic research. And I actually lead our work-life office, which we affectionately call the Broad Life Office. So helping to support our employees with issues around caregiving, mental health, physical wellness, financial education. So all the things that we do to try to make our lives work outside of work is what I focus on.
Wonderful. Shaina, how about you?
I am the Chief Human Resources Officer. Normally my employees call me Churro because they think that's what the acronym sounds like, of Sugar CRM. We sell customer experience software. We're headquartered in California. However, we have people all over the world, so we're small but spread apart. And then on the topic of this, right before you added me, my child was just sitting here asking me a question, just showing mixing work and life.
There we go. That's the reality for all of us, it feels like. And Jonathan, how about you, sir?
Yeah, glad to be here. Jonathan Cork, Bright Horizons. I'm part of the marketing team on the employer side of our business. And the vast majority of our work is providing benefit programs that employers can roll out to their workforce to help with childcare, to help with early education, help with college planning, school prep, elder care, the whole spectrum of work life and life outside of work, as Danielle put it so eloquently. So, glad to share the perspective of us as an employer and then some anecdotes of some of the progressive organizations we're privileged to serve.
Wonderful. Thank you. And this is so fun. I'm already watching everybody chiming in. We have them from across the U.S., but goodness, India, or I don't know my geography well enough. India or Johannesburg, South Africa may be our farthest people joining in. So welcome to the conversation. We're glad to have all of you here. And again, this is one of the things we talked about last week in prep for this. We talked about this being a human problem, essentially, right? It's not limited to any one group or certain person. This is a real human problem that companies are facing. And so just to level set a little bit, I'd love to just throw out a broad question to start this. And one of the things, again, I'm going to ask the audience is, as you're listening to this, please chime in. Please let us know the struggles you're dealing with, how you're facing this, what sort of things are working, what's not working so well. We'd love to make this as interactive as possible. So Danielle, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of pitch a question your way just to kind of kick this off a little bit and start talking about it. How are you working to support your staff in the middle of kind of all the things that are going on around us right now? How are you and your team working to support your staff as it pertains to the kind of conversation today around childcare and supporting them in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question and a really challenging one. So I think the first thing that we're doing is just acknowledging that this is really hard. Like, it feels nearly impossible if you have been trying to care for kids when schools shut down in the spring and then camps got canceled during the summer. And now you might be facing a decision. You might not even have a choice as to whether or not your child goes to school in person or is fully remote, or maybe you do have that choice and you're trying to navigate that and figure it out. And so I think what we have tried to do along the way, first and foremost, is listen and say, we hear you and we know this is hard, and let's think about all of the different ways that we can support you. So that starts off with flexibility. It starts off with acknowledging that there are going to be kids coming in and out of, Zoom calls as we all went remote. I think our, managers in our organization really stepped up to just understand the challenges that caregivers were facing, and that they were going to need maybe more flexibility than we've ever had before to be able to try to manage their work and manage caregiving. And then from, the resource standpoint, we had to start asking ourselves, okay, we have some things in place to support our employees in a non-COVID world. What things actually translate into COVID? So, do our, childcare supports, do our financial resources, are they going to be what our employees need right now? Or is there something else? And so, the something else is the piece that we have had to have conversations with employees to try to start answering what else can we do? And for us, just a really short example, I know Jonathan's aware of, for us this summer, that actually looked like partnering with Bright Horizons. And so we had a childcare center. We do not have our own on-site childcare center, but we reached out to Bright Horizons, and in partnership with them actually opened up a daycare as our employees were going back into work, because one of the challenges was there were no childcare centers open and schools were closed. And so the question was, okay, well, how am I going to go back to work if there's not someone to actually take care of my kid? Maybe I don't have a spouse or partner, or they're trying to work remotely as well. And so that ended up being a fantastic partnership that we did for 3 months this summer, childcare center that our employees could bring their kids to and know that they were safe and that they could then go back to work.
I want to ask you follow up in a minute, because I love the hunger there, the approach. And one of the things that I would point out is Broad is a nonprofit, correct?
Yes.
So to make that commitment, to dive in with both feet on that, that's out of the realm of possibility for what most people would even imagine. So I've been so excited to see that story and kind of follow that along as it's continued to develop. Shaina, how about sugar? What are you guys thinking? How are you facing this? I know we talked the other day, you knew immediately when I asked you if this was an issue, you said, I know exactly how many parents we have that have children. And I was like, I never even thought about that before, but now it becomes a thing we need to know.
Yeah, we first looked at how many of our people had children. We used some of our benefits data as a proxy to get a rough idea. And then we went out and asked people if they were impacted by this, and then ended up segregating our employees into different groups, because we found that there were different challenges based on what was going on in your life, and not just for necessarily our parents, but also for some of our single people who were alone and in quarantine and bored to death. So we came up with sort of a segmentation of our employee population that we then chatted with people and built programs off of. We didn't have huge budgets, we couldn't do a whole lot of stuff. We also don't have any real centralized employee location. Even our headquarters, we only have about 60 people here. And then we're spread all across the world. We are in 32 states and 9 countries. So we had to balance sort of what we could do legally in different countries, how we could support people, what was going on in those different countries from a pandemic standpoint, because it was different in different countries at different times. And so we really focused on trying to lead with empathy and flexibility. I think most organizations have tried as best they can. I know, Danielle, it sounds like your organization also focused on empathy. And so we did things like, we found someone created a survival guide for parents at home with kids that was like an open source guide.
Can I get a copy of that, by the way?
Yes. Yeah. It actually has some great tools and resources in it. I'll share it. You can share it. Someone named Jessica Yuen is the owner. I have no idea who this woman is, but I thank her to the end of my days. It had great tips for how to start the conversation with your manager on the flexibility you might need or the support you might need. Things you can do if you're in a webinar and you need your kids to be focused on some other stuff, and just all sorts of different resources out there. We offered people flexible hours. We crafted together very unique leaves of absences for people who needed time off, whether it was sporadically. We had a few people take the entire summer off because they just couldn't manage at home with work and multiple children. We provided a bunch of resources. We use LinkedIn Learning around stress management and remote working and managing your time to support people through that. We leveraged, this is US and UK only, so sorry for those of you outside those geos, but we leveraged our insurance carriers to get some additional online mental health resources that applied to both parents and children. And so we rolled out Talkspace internally. We pushed our EAP and really gave people some resources there, because we found through this that there were some people that also needed some resources on how to be better at parenting, for lack of a better word, where their kids were just like really disruptive, and they needed some help with like discipline and some resources for their children as well. And we also started a no apologies culture at the beginning of a lot of our calls. Everyone just says, I have kids, pets, someone I'm caring for, whatever. That's just part of it. And no one apologizes anymore for like, oh, there might be a distraction, I'm so sorry. Nope, it's just this is what I got, and this is sort of the amount of attention I can give this call right now. And rolled on with that. And then we also helped people on a targeted basis. Sometimes people were just feeling really down, so we sent them little cheer boxes that we found online. Sometimes we had our executives call people and just check in with them and give a personal touch. We spent a day writing handwritten notes to people to thank them. So you don't always have to do these big gestures. Sometimes it's the small things that people remember and sort of the continuous flow of that. So that's been our approach.
Goodness gracious. There's so many things to dive into. So I want to ask Jonathan a question. I want to come back to you and Danielle, because I want to ask you, both of you mentioned managers, and I want to talk on that piece for a minute. But Jonathan, you have this unique perspective of seeing lots of employers. You get to see into how they're addressing this, how they're solving this. Is there any sort of theme that you've seen emerge in the last couple of months? Is it all like our hair's on fire, all hands on deck? Is it, hey, we've got some plan to this? I'm just kind of curious where on that spectrum employers fall in general.
Well, I would say I'm privileged to work with employers that are progressive. Like by definition, this has always been the case, right? A fraction of employers, provides any sort of sponsored or subsidized kind of work-life benefit package, especially around ongoing childcare. And so those are the employers that have always been a little more willing to step in and support their families. And I would say there's a real mission-driven component to it, right? I think I don't know that I can speak for the broad pool of the employer community, but the ones that we get to work with that reach out to us, and many have in the last few months, existing employers who said, maybe their campus is closed and they had an on-site childcare center there, and their employees are accustomed to and have built their lives around the ability, some arrangement where their company helps provide childcare, but that company feels indebted to continue that. So now, how are we looking at providing a subsidy or providing backup days or providing some other sort of arrangement for the employees who are working from home who can't now go to that center? I mean, there's a sense of sort of obligation to their workforce that is really powerful, and of being creative and finding, if figure out something for the summer, like is what Danielle described, right? These programs, just figure out something, put it in place quickly, make sure it works for your budget, right? And communicating it broadly. I think that the three main pillars to it. One is figuring out what's best for your workforce, and I think the two examples Shaina described, a really distributed workforce, so a defined location, right? Like a particular childcare center or local nanny agency or something like that is not going to fit their profile, or a group that does have, that people are going into a specific office or set of offices, right? That's a very different dynamic. So that your workforce's distribution is an important element of figuring out a solution, right? or your strategy. The other big piece, which I don't want to steal the thunder, we're going to talk about that, is the managers, right? And how much autonomy you're giving them, but also how much training you're giving them on how to manage these conversations with employees. That's so instrumental. And then the communication. I think always it's hard for employees to keep abreast of all the benefits and all your leave policies and what you're entitled to and what you can request to your manager, what's sort of statutory and what's at the manager's discretion. Now more than ever, it's really important, I think, for the organizations. We're doing this internally through every measure possible, through employee resource groups, through manager training calls, through town halls, through emails, through direct mail, all the different means you can of trying to reach through to people who are, they've got all sorts of things in their mind, to make sure people know what's available and know when to use it. I think that's a big area of focus for us with our employers that we partner with, provide services to, is not just what program are you offering, but how are you planning to communicate it, right? Its availability and who it's for and when they can use it, and getting out ahead of it. So if you're doing something for the school year, communicating it in July and August, because that's when the panic is setting in, that they have a little bit of peace of mind before Labor Day. So those are just a few perspectives.
Awesome, wonderful. Appreciate that. Again, you have that unique view of the world, so I'm glad for that. Danielle, you mentioned managers. I told you I was going to come back to you and follow up, because that's one of the things that I've been watching really, really carefully. Sounds like your team is located in general in one place. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're located in the Boston area. So we are a location-based organization, and people are spread out throughout the Boston area. Okay.
So I was going to say, Shaina's world is different, right? They are fairly remote, but for your team, you might have managers that have never had an employee they did not see every single day reporting to them suddenly. And so can you talk about how you worked with your managers in that transition and helping them see this, helping them support the people? Because we can do lots of great things as HR leaders, as talent leaders, but it comes down to that manager in some cases to be the actual interaction and how that actually plays out. You mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think this is where, collaboration within your organization and within your, even HR team. So I certainly can't take the credit for, I provide a lot of resources to managers and training and support. But our HR partner team is on the ground, is meeting with all of the different teams that they support within Broad. We have lots of different programs and platforms and different research areas. And so you have a lot of different micro teams. And so, our HR partners were putting together resources. How do you transition to remote work? How do you give feedback via Zoom versus in person, right? So helping people to sort of navigate that. I think the other thing, we have a really strong people analytics team. And so we historically did surveys, at the Broad, and, the leader of that team said, we need to know what's going on right now. I think to Shaina's point, like, what are our employees experiencing? How is this impacting them? Let's not miss a population because they don't, for example, have kids, or are we thinking about, people who are caregiving for seniors? And so we actually started doing surveys as we were going through the pandemic to be able to check in with our employees and understand what they were experiencing. And, just sort of, one anecdote there is that, the managers who are also caregiving, and whether that's caregiving for kids or caregiving for a senior, were some of our most stressed out employees, because they were thinking about their teams at work that they're trying to support and provide resources, think about how to continue the work getting done. And then they were managing whatever responsibilities they had in their home life. And so if you think about sort of the intersection of those stressors, we had to make sure that we were connecting with those managers and leaders that were leading teams, and then also managing whatever challenges they faced at home. So were they getting the resources and support that they needed? Did they have, the information available to them to be able to go into a conversation and say, I hear this challenge, let's talk about flexibility. Let's bring in the HR partner to talk a little bit about what that might look like. Or, it sounds like, maybe one of the resources you need is to connect with our employee assistance program. Or did you know that our health plan, Blue Cross has waived copays for telehealth? So being able to make sure that they were equipped for, those pieces, and then turning the table and making sure we were saying to them, what do you need? How are you being supported? Right? What do we need to be able to support you? So I think that conversation was not just about them supporting the rest of the team members, but also making sure that they had the support that they needed. And I think, quite frankly, that's where the leadership of your organization comes in, because we're all looking to, senior leaders as well to model this, to acknowledge it, to reach out and say, okay, I have 10 direct reports who are then all leading teams. How am I supporting them? So I think, our leadership really, stepped up in this moment. And, I think I'll just make one more point to Jonathan's point about communication. We use our, intranet as sort of our hub. And I think a lot of organizations, have that. So we were making sure that information was being updated. We did start doing town halls, virtual town halls. In our case, because we are a scientific and research organization, we have researchers doing research on COVID, right? And so updating our community about what is the science of COVID? What are we learning? We're a testing center in the state of Massachusetts, and we actually just processed our 1 millionth COVID test, which is pretty awesome to be able to contribute in that way. And our employees wanted to know, like, what's happening, what's going on, and so being able to communicate that. But one thing in particular that I noticed happened during those town halls, people would have questions. There would certainly be more questions than there were time to answer, but there was a concerted effort to make sure that any question that got submitted and asked, if it wasn't answered live, it got answered. And so it got put back up on our intranet, and you could go back and watch the recording of the town hall. You could go back and see the answer to that question that got asked that didn't necessarily get answered. And so I think this is an opportunity for organizations to really walk their talk, especially if they're talking about things like transparency, if they're talking about, really supporting employees and listening to their employees and then responding. This is an opportunity to really model that and really ingrain it into the fabric of your organization moving forward.
That is tremendous. Again, I love the point you made about managers. We think about them being they're off on their own little island, but some of them are caregivers as well. And so they are not just between a rock and a hard place, but between whatever a rock and a hard place and the other thing that comes and hits them out of nowhere, when they're not expecting it. That's the life they're living. And it's easy to forget that, right? Because they're managers, they deal with stuff, and that's just part of their job. But it's easy to forget that they also may be caught between this as well and be living this and trying to sort it out. My hope is that would make them more empathetic, but at the same time, they're being pulled. That's going to be more stressful for them. So who knows if it's going to balance out, or if it's going to just lead them to be even more pulled and tugged than they would have been otherwise. So Shaina, if you don't mind, we just had a question come in from the audience. I want to pitch your way. Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right. So speaking of questions coming in, Danielle was talking about town halls and things like that. So I know, again, most of your team is remote, but Karen sent a question in and said, how our company's working with IT to make sure that managers get the tools to get the face time with their people. And because you and your team already have that remote component, I'm kind of curious if there's a way that you encourage managers to spend time with their people, not just, hey, what's your tasks? What have you done for me lately? But spending some time with them, report personal discussions or things like that to really emphasize that side of it, not just your task list, but the other things that need to get done, or not just the things that need to get done, the other things about who someone is, because that's the thing that feels like it's missing lately. You don't have that opportunity to connect with people in that way. So I don't know if you have an answer for that one. You want to kick that one around a little bit, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I am best friends with my IT team. We talk literally on a daily basis about tools and people using tools and things like that. So I can absolutely answer that. So we work really closely with our IT team in general. Even pre-COVID, the majority of our employees were actually remote. And so we've always had a challenge with, as we've onboarded new hires, making sure that they understand the tools, have the tools, know how to use the tools. So we had already built out on our intranet sort of a list of all the tools, what the link was, where to go for help, and then any tutorial videos that supported people. So we had that built. So that made it a little bit easier going into this. And then in terms of getting managers to, have real conversations with their people, we actually gave them scripts that they could use for their one-on-ones for checking in with people. Like one of the trends we noticed early on was everyone just stopped taking vacation. They couldn't really go anywhere, so people just stopped. And we're like, this is a problem. This is not healthy for anyone. regardless of their situation. And so as part of the script, we updated it to have the managers ask, when was the last time you took vacation? Do you have anything planned? How can you plan? What do you want to plan? Let me help you. And so we started out giving them little blurbs to talk to their people about, and that definitely helped. And we would send messages to the managers like, hey, make sure you check in with your employees about, are they feeling burnt out? Are they feeling stressed? Are they going on vacation? And so kind of, I think about once a month, we would give them a new topic to discuss as sort of like a manager bites section, to encourage them. Obviously, their managers, they have their own priorities. They may or may not listen to us, but we tried to reinforce it from the executive team down with our town halls. And then I also attended most of the team meetings and would stress it again there and say, hey, if your manager hasn't talked to you about this, let me know, or you bring it up with your manager, whatever you feel more comfortable with. And by doing that, we kind of ensured as best we could that the conversations happened.
Wonderful. I love that. So actually, I'm going to rebound off that one, because you talked about this personal outreach, helping those managers with scripts, things like that. One of the things that I'm curious about is how you are getting the information up to you about what you can do to help, right? You mentioned a lot of ideas earlier. Danielle, I want to kind of kick this one to you, because I think you mentioned surveys a minute ago, just kind of offhand, and I'd love for you to dig into that a little bit. How did you and the rest of the team at Broad figure out what your employees actually needed? How'd you gather that information and then decide to act on it?
I think in a moment like this, you want to be getting as much data as possible, and then trying to sort of collate that and see if you see patterns or trends. So some of that is going to come up through, if we have a larger group or team, they're going to sort of roll the managers in that, sort of roll that up to the group leader, who then, can sort of roll it up to senior leadership. So I think sort of individual conversations. As I said, we do an organizational survey. And so we started running those. So that went out to our entire employee population, as well as in our case, we have people who are affiliated with the Broad who are not our paid employees, but are still part of our community, maybe collaborating on research projects. So our surveys actually go out to the entire community to check in, and we added in questions. So we would have, sort of our standard questions, but we added in questions around caregiving. We added in questions around mental health and stress and anxiety. We've added in questions about, dealing with systemic racism and the racial injustice. So as we have gone along, we have continued to add in questions that are timely and related to the things that we, know are stressing people out. And then we also did I also ran a separate parenting survey. So early on, when we were trying to think about a bunch of different options that we might consider adding to support parents, we just went and asked them directly and said, hey, can you fill out this survey? So I think, to Shaina's point, like you look and you see, okay, in our case, we know we have 440 parents and they represent, 700 plus kids. And so we just asked them and we gave options and said, what do you think of these, as well as just tell us what you think you need. And then I think the other place is, if you look within your organization, where else are people gathering or congregating sort of cross-functionally? So for us, that included our employee resource groups. So they were another way that we could tap into specific populations within our community to make sure that they were getting the support that they needed. And we weren't just assuming that, okay, if we give this general support and communication, is that really targeting, the groups that may be underrepresented or under-resourced in some way? And we did, some separate sort of smaller focus groups. So recently we actually did a town hall with our, Women at Broad group. Not that caregiving is a women's issue, but if you look at all of the data, we know that the caregiving responsibility is falling disproportionately on women. And so we had a conversation with them, and it was just sort of open forum to just talk about, one, what has been working for you? What were you doing? How did you manage your kids? What tool, did you find, or, have you gone ahead and brought in a caregiver, or why not? So people were able to share some of the things that were working for them within, sort of breakout rooms and Zoom. But then we also opened it up to just get feedback and say, okay, we're, 2/3 of the way through the summer, the school year is approaching, there's all these unknowns, what else do you need? And, one last quick example, last Friday, we actually hosted a parenting town hall. So we had done all these sort of general town halls. We did a remote work town hall, just talking about, remote work and what that looks like, because we're not an organization that historically had been remote. And an employee suggested a few weeks ago, he said, with all of the different information I'm hearing about whether or not I should send my kid to school or not, is it safe for them to go to daycare? I need some help. So could we do something that has some science and some parenting stuff? And we said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So we put together a town hall that included some of our scientists talking about, okay, here's what the current data is saying about transmission in kids and what we know and all the things we don't know. And then I talked a bit about, here are the resources that we had in place. Here are the new things that we're adding. Here are the things that we're thinking about. And then we also took questions. And so we had a huge bank of questions that we didn't even get through. So I think we're probably going to have to do another one, in support of that. But finding as many different ways as you can to tap into people, because people are going to connect differently. And then the last thing I'll say is there's also the virtual channel. So the conversations that have been happening within Slack in our organization is like a treasure trove of information about what people are dealing with, what they're thinking about, what articles and studies and resources they're finding that are helpful. So you can literally go into the Slack channel and ask questions, or you can go in there and just listen and hear, because they're going to tell you.
I'm loving all these different mechanisms and ways for us to get information. Some of it's direct, like overt. I'm asking you specifically to respond to a survey, but other times it's, hey, let me tap into the managers and hear what they're hearing from their people. Maybe they're not telling us directly, but they're hearing this from their side operationally. Or I can go take a peek at the Slack channel over there, see what kind of conversations are happening and what people are talking about, and use that as a gauge for how important this is, how much of an issue we need to address, things like that. That's really, really intriguing. Jonathan, I'd love to hear anything to chime in on. You work with different employers when they are trying to figure out what people need. What's the best way to really tap into that quickly, get the pulse, especially right now where it seems like the truth yesterday is different than the truth today, is different than the truth tomorrow. Things can change quickly. Talk a little about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, and we learn so much from the employers that are sharing with us and pulling us in. And so I won't take credit for some of these ideas, but I will share some of them, right? Because I've seen some really, I think, enterprising and effective uses of survey questions. Everything Danielle said is right there as prime examples. One thing I want to stress, which she described, is there's layers, right? Demographics are a really important starting point to baseline how large is the population, but there are so many nuances within that information that I've seen employers ask, because give you an example, I know some hospital systems we work with actively recruit physicians from out of country, or had, it's sort of more difficult now, but had, or recruit nurses to rural locations. They, people who don't have immediate family or extended family in the region are hit harder often, right? Because a lot of people are, if you live near a sibling or a parent who's able-bodied, et cetera, you can lean on grandparent care if you feel safe with that. So number of kids is not the only sort of inflection point, right, or barometer. And then certain kids need more attention than others, whether it's a diagnosed challenge that they have, emotional, developmental, social, et cetera, or not, right? Some kids are very capable of learning on their own, and families are making different choices. So whether or not your school district is virtual or hybrid or in person, some of the families in your workforce may not be choosing to do that. They may be choosing to homeschool. And so you can't make generalizations if you're truly focused on that family circumstance. So we've seen employers ask questions like, what is your school system doing? What are you planning to do? Those are different, right? And that gives you a lot of information. And then the other area I've seen is sometimes they might not be comfortable having those conversations with managers until they're ready and they have a very specific request. And Shaina mentioned sometimes the managers are timid or busy or don't feel equipped to have the conversation. But asking a survey ahead of that, what actions are you considering, such as, and it's sort of an anonymous, non-committal way, are you considering asking for reduced hours, asking for modified hours, taking a leave of absence, and asking that kind of question out to the population to really get a sense for how seismic the changes could be in terms of your work schedule. That kind of thing can give the HR team an advance notice, right? A leading indicator of what the fall looks like, which can be really powerful.
Can I add one quick survey thing?
Sure.
I think a lot of people don't realize that there's tons of free survey tools out there. If you're a Google shop, you can set up surveys in Google Forms if you have predominantly Microsoft products. Microsoft has their own form thing you can set stuff in. I think WorkHuman has Mood Tracker now that's available for free that does free pulse surveys, and you can edit some of the questions. So there's tons of free tools out there for surveying your people. You don't necessarily have to spend a whole ton of time on it, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, just to even get a directional idea can help guide you and guide your path. So don't be afraid to try it.
And I'm going to just hop in there as well, because I think the other two things I'll say about surveys. One is that we, also shared at sort of a high organizational level. We would come back in the next town hall and say, here are some of the results, right, that we're hearing from you. So it's acknowledging we asked you, thank you for taking the time, and here's what we learned. The other thing I would say, though, is if you're not committed to actually doing something with the data, then don't ask. If you're, and you don't have to promise, right, in a survey, yes, we're going to do all these things. You can say, we're considering these things, or, to Jonathan's point, what would be helpful to you? But if you're going to ask that, then you need to be prepared as an organization to follow up and do some of those things, or at least respond and say, we heard you, and based on that, we're thinking about X, Y, and Z, or we're actually rolling out A, B, and C based on what we heard from the survey data. Please continue to give us feedback, because this is an iterative process. But if you are not willing to do that as an organization, the only thing you're going to do is alienate your employees, because then you're asking, they're telling you, and then you're not doing anything.
Yes. Be careful what you ask for.
Yes.
It's always the rule in surveys, right? Well, Brianne actually asked a question earlier. She said, what tools could we use? Shaina, you hit that one really well. She also asked, how do you encourage participation? And part of that encouraging participation is doing something about it when they, like you were just saying, right? We're going to address this. We're going to bring it up in an open forum and talk about the issue that you raised. That's addressing those things is a great way to get people to chime in next time, because they see you actually doing the thing you say you're going to do. If you don't do that over time, that participation falls off when people realize, hey, I've raised this issue 3 times and no one's yet come to me and offered to help or given me any tools. No one's supporting me through that. So in our time we've got left, I have a question about, because we've heard this a couple times in the discussion today, stress. Okay, I have 4 kids, 10 and under. I won't say stress is a part of our daily language around the house, but it may or may not be. Okay, so the stress piece of that, helping people deal with it, resources, tools. Someone mentioned, pointing people to EAP a minute ago, and I know, Shaina, you mentioned that earlier. Anything you'd say on helping managers, helping employees, helping just the people in general at work cope with the stress of this, what seems to be kind of an ongoing thing we're going to have to get used to in some ways. I don't want to say get used to it like just put up with it, but this part of this can be part of the rhythm of life for a little while. How do we get people over that stress piece there?
So we have a lot of stressed out people in our organization right now. We've had 10% of our organization evacuated from the wildfires. We've had social, political unrest, both in the US that people are coping with and also outside the US. And then all of that's like on top of the base level of the pandemic, where people are just having a constant level of just generalized anxiety. And so we've been trying to get people to, and part of the problem is people are so stressed about all this stuff that a lot of times they don't have the time or don't set aside the time to deal with it or learn what they can do with it. So we work on different initiatives throughout the year. We've realized this has become a much greater issue for a lot of people. So we're working on a whole new program of focused support. We're doing a monthly series of sort of wellness topics that include stress management, mindfulness, nutrition. Our employees asked about estate planning, so we're doing something for estate planning, which seems slightly morbid, but we understand why. And so we're putting together a whole series of programs. We partnered with insurance companies and people in the community. I probably sound like I'm incredibly frugal. We don't have huge budgets, so I try to do everything I can in as inexpensively as possible for my organization. And so we're doing that. We've also worked with, like I said, we use LinkedIn Learning a lot. And so we built out with them a monthly calendar of mindfulness and stress management activities that are just 2 to 3 minute videos that are short bites, that are something that can be done. We're also working on sort of a manager series where we send people messages periodically just to say things like, have you stopped and breathed today? Like, what have you done for yourself? Just as little reminders. And then we use Slack. So we've also integrated, there's a free Slack bot called FlexBot that you can add to your Slack channel, and it does things like it reminds people to drink water. It can walk them through guided meditation, stretching. It can set up reminders to take breaks. So we're trying to do all of that. We're still finding it difficult because I think people do have really high levels of stress right now. And so we're, like I said, we just try to support people as best we can. Every so often, if we have a parent that's near the breaking point, we'll send them a bottle of wine just to be like, here you go, take a load off. Or we'll send like a little box of soup just to say, I'm thinking about you. So we try to do things like that. And we can, because we're a smaller organization. It's a lot harder, I think, in a larger organization to even be aware that those types of things are happening on a day-to-day basis. So any way you can equip your managers to be able to sort of, kind of surprise and delight people and make sure that they know they're being thought about is really helpful. And then we've done things like for wildfire evacuees, we've paid for their hotel. We've evacuated people from other countries to get someplace safe. So we've had to do things like that as well. And same thing I think we had people in the path of the hurricanes in the South, where we got them evacuated and got them set up. So just kind of being aware about everything that's going on as much as you can.
Wonderful. Thank you. Danielle, you want to give it a minute or two on that?
Yeah, happy to chime in. I'm going to try to make 3 points pretty quickly. So the first one is actually something that that Shaina mentioned earlier that we've also seen within our organization is people not taking their time off because everything got canceled. So all the vacations got canceled. I can't go anywhere. And so people are sort of banking up their time off. And so one, I think, is encouraging people to take breaks. Just because you can't take, your week vacation to Aruba, which is where I was planning to go, or someplace, wonderful like that, you can still take a day off or a half a day here or a few days and do a staycation. But the mental release that comes from taking a break from work is really, really important. And so one, I think encouraging your employees to do that, having your senior leadership do that. We were on a town hall a couple of weeks ago and our chief operating officer had just come back and she talked in the town hall about how she just got back from vacation. So I think there is a modeling aspect of doing that, which includes the managers taking time off to do that. We have added, for example, like this Friday is not a normal holiday, but we've added it to give our employees a 4-day weekend via Labor Day. We did the same thing, in July. And so as an organization, sort of promoting that and then encouraging managers to encourage their team members to take time off, I think is one thing. In terms of mental health, I think, again, this is an opportunity for organizations to do what we all probably should have been doing for a long time. We have been sort of focused on this mental health conversation for about the last year. So we certainly had some things that were already in place. I think partnering with organizations that are providing mental health support. So starting, if you have an employee assistance program, that's what many of them are built for, providing resources to your employees and making sure that they know about it. We started doing manager training sessions with our EAP to actually invite managers to come to a session to learn, what is the EAP? How do I have a conversation with an employee? How do I refer them? So actually equipping them and giving them the tools so that they understand the resource. And then if you have your medical plan, your telehealth, again, promoting those things that are already in place and basically decreasing friction. So I like to think about mental health as how can you decrease friction, which means making it really accessible for people, making it, confidential, if possible. They don't necessarily need to know. You don't need to know that they're going. You just want them to be able to go. So making sure that the employee has as little friction as possible and then seeing where your gaps are. So we had an employee assistance program. we partnered with a local psychological practice, so they have been doing workshops for us. But one of the things that I noticed was a general workshop for stress was good, and we were doing those, and we have a 6-week workshop that people who want a lot of depth can go in, but people have very specific challenges right now. So one of the things that we did was our provider is actually doing weekly drop-in sessions, support group sessions, but they're targeted, right? So today they're talking about, how do you think about time management? So she does a little bit of teaching and talking about, stress related to time management, stress related to managing relationships. So we send that out every week. Here's this week's topic, drop in if it works for you, right? And so trying to make it as accessible and targeted. There's a parenting workshop that we're doing right now, how to think about parenting in the time of COVID, but it's led by a psychologist because there are specific challenges that you're facing when your kids have been remote and don't have their friends and they're acting out, all of those things. So I think very targeted mental health options right now are really great. And then from there, figuring out what's your baseline going to be. So in our case, that's an employee assistance program. It's, some of the workshops we have. We're launching a partnership with Calm. So we're rolling out the Calm app because we used to have on-site meditation. We're not on-site anymore. And we said, okay, well, how can we think about this differently? Instead of paying a meditation instructor and, some subpopulation who can make it on that day coming to meditation, how about we think about rolling out this app to all of our employees so that they can use it, and then we can, sort of encourage them to take advantage of that tool. So I think trying to figure out what are all the different options that you have based on your budget. And there's somebody popping in. Just 1 minute, bud. Yes, you can. Yes, you can go back. There you go.
There we go.
Case in point. So yeah, so just thinking about what are the different levers that you can pull, and how can you think about sort of broad things that you might offer, as well as specific sort of targeted, timely things for a particular stressor that your population is facing. Again, I think to Shaina's point earlier, that a lot of us are thinking about what are our different demographics and what are the particular stressors that they're trying to manage, and how can you sort of introduce conversations about mental health and stress in the context of that particular stressor.
Wonderful. And hey, that was perfectly timed. Well done.
So welcome.
Orchestrating that. So we've had some amazing ideas coming from the panel today. We've had some great questions coming in as well. So by the way, several people are pinging in the comments saying, can we get some of these recommendations, some of these resources, things like that Shaina and Danielle are sharing? I will, if you want to ping me on LinkedIn, we'll try to wrap those things together, get a resource or two from each of these ladies that they would recommend, or some of the ones they've mentioned maybe, and point you that direction. Happy to try to pull those together for you, because they've appreciated hearing from each of you, your boots on the ground, how you're handling this, how you're supporting it, virtual boots on the ground. Maybe that's a better term these days. So I just want to say thank you, Jonathan, Shaina, Danielle, for each of you for sharing with us, bring your insights, giving us some of your time. You can't get that back, but I would say it's well spent, invested in the community. So thank you to each of you for your time today. This has been tremendous.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. To our amazing and wonderfully engaged audience, we appreciate you for chiming in, for sharing your stories, for talking about what you're dealing with. This said at the outset, this is a human problem. We're all facing it, and we're all going to get through it together. Thank you for your questions and your comments. We appreciate Bright Horizons for making today possible. And until next time, stay safe and be well.